come from Arkansas. I've been presenting this a couple of times for a few cons down there, and I saw an opportunity to come up here, and I was like, all right. So nice to meet you all. Glad y'all chose to make it. So this is going to be an introduction to fiction writing. Because we have, there's so much ground to cover, this is going to be like the barest bones of to get you going. So I will be stopping every now and then for questions, and hopefully we'll have enough time at the end for, broad questions. All right, so let's get started. Let's see here. First things first, when you're getting started with writing, is you need to figure out what kind of writer you are. The two camps that have been broadly accepted from, let's see if I did wrong. The two camps that have broadly been accepted by most people when they do it is that's not working right. So the two camps that are broadly accepted for writing fiction is called plotters, who outline their things, outline their stories as they go, and pantsers, who are generally they sit down and they start writing. Now, we were actually having a brief discussion before this started, and these two other people up front, and they were describing how they were plotting out their novels. Both are correct. There is no wrong way to write a novel except for the way where you don't write it. So if you want to figure out which ways you fall under, if you think you're generally a plotter, what that means is when you start writing is if you try to just go for it, you get stuck, and you get stuck easily. It's either anxiety or you don't know where to go from here. And the way around that is, you plan out your plot beats beforehand, figure out the order that they're going to go, and go back and revise them as you go. If you're a pantser, what will happen when you're trying to do this is you will find yourself, if you're plotting out your book, that you're getting bored with your story, and that you're like, well, I just want, I already wrote it out. It's already here. I don't need to write it again. So when it comes to this, it's more of a mindset way of coming up with your first draft. Now, the cons of this is if you see yourself as a plotter, give them a second. If you see yourself as a plotter, is you get married to your outline. And what that means is that as your story goes, you're starting to struggle with keeping your story, with your story starting to feel like something's off, or things aren't making sense, and you're forcing the plot points to connect rather than naturally going forward. If you're a pantser, where you can go wrong, the most common way is you struggle to find the end of your story. For the two probably most prominent examples of these going wrong, plotting, when it goes wrong, you get the Game of Thrones TV show, specifically the last season or two. If you want to see discovery writing go wrong, the most prominent example is the Song of Fire and Ice book series. Let's see here. Other examples for discovery writing, when you just run out of ideas, is also the story goes on too long. Has anyone ever read a book where they felt like the last 100 pages was just like an extra long epilogue? I'm getting that's a sign that perhaps the author didn't know when their story was over. So before I take questions, because the most common question I get is that these are not mutually exclusive. They are technically on a binary scale. Plotters will sometimes take scenes and go, you know what, let's just see what happens, go from point A to point B. It's just they don't go as far as a pantser writer. And pantsers, they will often build structures before they jump off into the great unknown, if for no other reason, so that way they don't go way off into the weeds. All right, so do we have any initial questions about plotting or pantsing? I don't know if that means I was really good or really bad. All right, so next up is I would like to talk about the rules of writing, because you're going to hear all sorts of things about that, and probably have heard all sorts of things about the rules of writing. So, what are some rules that you have heard in writing? Start off the story with a catchy hook. Do we have any other rules?
Never have dialogue in the middle of a paragraph.
Never have dialogue in the middle of a paragraph. Any other examples?
Keep your exclamation points to a minimum.
Keep your exclamation points to a minimum. I have... Does anyone else have one more? Or... Yes.
Dialogue tags. You're not supposed to have them, or you're supposed to have them, or they're only supposed to be said.
Dialogue tags. You're supposed to have them. You're not supposed to have them. They're only supposed to be said. There is a bunch of rules on dialogue tags. So what I'm going to say to all of those rules is that none of those rules are in complete, concrete, always must be done. And that the only rule in my years of experience in writing and studying writing is that the steadfast rule is keep your reader reading. So, and it's one of those things like you stop and it's like, yeah, that's super obvious. Sometimes, I'm sure we've all read at least one book where we found out maybe that's not so obvious after all. So it's worth keeping in mind. One thing also to remember though is that this is not necessarily to compromise with the masses, because who is everyone's number one reader? Yourself. Thank you. Yes, always write what you want to write in a way that you would love to read it, because even if it's not the next great American novel, there is an audience out there for it. And if you're writing things that you don't want to write, it will show through and readers will pick up on that. So keep that in mind. So next up, I'm going to talk a little bit about giving and receiving feedback. First and foremost, this is much more before I do that, I should stop and ask, is there any questions on rules of writing? Or anything about a rule you've heard or anything like that? Yes, sir.
Is there any purpose
reason, okay, is there ever a reason to switch the perspective of your novel, i.e. from first person to third person? The short answer is yes. The bit of the longer answer is you would sort of need to have a justification for it. One example I've heard is, oh gosh, I forget the name of the book now, but there was a novel where it would switch between, it would switch from past, there's multiple point of views. One of the lead characters was in present tense while all the other characters were in past tense. The reason that this one character was written in present tense was because the character was autistic. And one way to show that this character saw the world differently than the other characters was the tense shift. And it would jar the reader, and also note that this was done with a specific reason in mind. I think the most common reason I've seen a tense shift from third person to first person is, first off, it's between different characters. It was the first person character was a killer, and it was a mystery. So and it was a little bit of a cheat because, you know, when you're thinking to yourself, you don't usually refer to yourself by your own name, like, Andrew, you're talking right now. Andrew, I hope this is going well. You know, you use eyes and do that. So it was sort of a bit of cheats where they could talk from the killer's perspective without giving away who the killer was. I'm sure there's other ways to justify switching from third person to first person. I mean, probably even with the same character, but I cannot think of a reason off at the top of my head. If you can see it, you know, try it out. If it works when other people read it, keep it. Yes. Also, for those who didn't hear, our lovely audience member in the black hoodie gave us an example of a story they've read of multiple points of view. All right. Last call. Okay. One thing I remembered as I was going through this is I need to talk a little bit more because I forgot an important thing about the one true rule is, so when I say that the one rule is to keep your reader reading, is how do you do that? Exactly. Keep your reader reading is such an overly broad term or overly broad rule that it's almost meaningless, which is where all the other rules that we've talked about and have not talked about come into play. So, and what it is when those rules work for our story and keep us and our readers reading, we use them. When they don't work, that's when we don't use them and try something else. All right, so do you have a follow-up? Okay, so giving and receiving feedback. This is also one of the most basic functions of writing, because in our own heads, we can only